Hey everyone, this is Dr. Aeronautics. In this tutorial episode, I'll be showing you how to do a manual ascent, how to orient the craft in space, and show you the automatic ascent autopilot, the null speed autopilot, and the automatic docking autopilot. I have a lot to show, so I'm going to kind of do it as quick as possible and only show the necessary items. So, we have run through the ground takeoff, or rather the ground cockpit startup, so we're going to go straight into the before takeoff checklist, so that we can transition from our takeoff readiness state to taking off. So the first step is to check EPU and battery are off, passenger seatbelt on. And then we're going to arm the ejection seat so we can bail out if we need to. Going into space, so I'm going to set this to medium. And check that we are on atmospheric auto, and we are. So now with the command D61, we'll check the vessel state. It's kind of hard to type with...
configuration correct.
My yoke is kind of blocking my keyboard. Okay, so we're good. We want that on D3 now, which will display our temperatures and G-forces, which are kind of really important when you're taking off. And that's it. So we're going to very quickly now, all at once, apply full power, rotate at 160, maintain a 10-degree nose-up climb at 200 meters per second. Gear goes up, although honestly I would do it before then. Yeah, I'm going to do it before then. You turn the gear hydraulic pressure off, and that's the end of the things that happen very quickly. Once we're through that first set of the takeoff checklist, I'm going to turn to heading of 42 degrees, which is where the ISS is going. That's where I'm going to have the automatic ascent autopilot send us. Okay, so I'm going to perform the takeoff in 3, 2, 1, now. Alright, auto air intake is opening.
V1. Rotate.
Okay, seeking 10 degrees nose up pitch. Positive rate, gear is going up, and I'm pulling back to about 60% to maintain my speed here. Let's see, gear is up. I'm going to turn the gear hydraulic pressure off up here, right there. Okay, so now I'm going to bank to the east for heading 4-2. Again, just to note, the DeltaGlider IV has an extremely high density, such that, you know, I'm flying at 500 miles per hour. I just took off, and to put that in perspective, that's about 470 knots. A normal airplane at this altitude would be doing about 230, which is, we're at about 2,000 feet here. So I have the altitude in feet and miles while we're low, because I like aviation. I also have the speed in knots, the speed in miles per hour, and the Mach number speed. The speeds become kind of irrelevant to me once I get above Mach 1 in miles per hour, and the altitude in feet and miles I will terminate at 100,000 feet, because once I'm beyond the civilian regime, there is no interest in using feet and miles once I'm beyond the atmosphere. Okay, so we're going to ascend. So full power, and I'm going to pitch steeply up. So in one of my previous tutorials on Ascent, I was using the stock DeltaGlider, and someone actually commented that it was extremely inefficient. Okay, coming up on 10,000 feet, activating the turbo pump. Listen to this. Okay, so now the engine control is orange and the plume is orange too. We're now at absolute full power. So yeah, this guy was basically mentioning, hey, you have a scramjet. You need to use a lower profile and use your scramjets first before you're out of the atmosphere and you can't use them. That way you're lowering your mass and going faster. And yes, that's true. I didn't decide to do that because the tutorial was how to fly. This tutorial is how to fly the DeltaGlider IV. And because there's DeltaGlider IV in there, that necessitates that you fly a particular ascent. And in the DeltaGlider IV, we don't have any scramjets. So the idea with it is to get out of the atmosphere as quickly as possible so that you don't use a lot of drag in doing so. And because there's no scramjets, you just want to get straight out because the atmosphere does not help the DeltaGlider IV at all. Okay, we're now up to about 70,000 feet. Looking good on fuel. When we get to about 7 kilometers per second, we'll disable the turbo pump. Okay, 1 kilometer per second, 93,000 feet. That's it, we're above 100,000. Okay, so over here on the re-entry control display, you have a number of temperatures. You want to keep these below about 900 centigrade. If it's over 900 centigrade, you're causing the craft to work too hard against drag. Okay, so while we were outside, you just saw, well, it's gone now. The automatic control has just switched on the reaction control jets because we're too high. Another thing too is the automatic air intake, which was down here, just closed. You can't see it right now. So if you look at the front, we actually have RCS jets firing, holding attitude. Okay, so we're on our way to orbit now. And one question that you should ask is, what altitude are you aiming for your main engine cutoff, MECO? For me, I prefer anywhere between about 75 and 90 kilometers with the XR2 or the DeltaGlider IV. You definitely want above 75 kilometers because, again, without any scramjets, it is absolutely useless for you being at a lower altitude. So that's what I suggest. And that's what I'm going to aim for. One note too about the autopilot is it's actually going to put us in orbit at about 230 kilometers with full circularization. Technically, that's a little bit more expensive, or a little bit more fuel efficient, but only by like 0.5%. So unless every kilogram counts, this ascent really doesn't make a difference. But if every kilogram does count, I would definitely opt to use the autopilot. But otherwise, if it doesn't, I like to fly the craft, because otherwise it's just me sitting along for the ride, and that's kind of boring. Okay, so I'm going to hold about 10 degrees, and we're going to aim for 75 kilometers. And we'll come back when we get close to about 7 kilometers per second. Okay, welcome back. We're just about over 7 kilometers per second now. Notice how our G value is building up as we get lighter, satisfying the rocket equation. Okay, so now we're going to disable the turbo pump. Check this out. This will go blue. Our exhaust plume, which is orange, will turn to blue. Okay, turbo's off. And we'll just aim for 230, what the autopilot's going to do. Okay, main engine cutoff, and that's that. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at what our dynamic pressure is right now. It's still kind of high, 0.3. I do want to continue going through this checklist, and then we can kind of skip through it when the autopilot does it. Okay, so we're done. This section about the autopilot does not apply to us now because I'm doing a manual ascent. So actually this whole section here does not apply. We are now in orbit, although not technically. We need to circularize, but close enough. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn off all of the redundant systems because they're not immediately needed. We're not in a critical mission phase. You want those on for re-entry, ascent, probably docking, and landing. But the checklist will tell you when to turn them on. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is deploy the radiator, and that will allow our electrical systems to cool. Okay, while that's deploying, turn the seat belt off, and that's the very last thing. So now they're not wearing spacesuits, and we can't eject. Okay, we just received the status message, radiator's deployed, and we have a green light. See, no spacesuits. Okay. Alright. We are sufficiently high enough now. So, of course, what I like to do at this point is change the HUD color. If I can find my way to my keyboard. To green. We're also going to change the HUD to orbit. There is no button, so what you got to do is you either press it here on the MFD, which is not its dedicated button, or you can press H to cycle through it. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the orientation of the craft and how to do that. So I did demonstrate flight computer operation before. So if I go to D1, you will now see that is the loaded program. Okay, I've got the keyboard in a location now where I shouldn't screw up. Okay, so we'll also go to
Rotation.
RCS rotation because I don't have any intention of coming back to the atmosphere. So to orient the craft, you can do two things. You can press this button, which is, you know, technically that's the preferred way of doing it, but I actually like to use the keyboard because that's more realistic to spacecraft we have today. And the more realistic that I can make this, the more self-joy that I feel for some reason. Okay, so I can show you the other way of doing that. If I turn it off. If I do P for program 200, that's the attitude program, spec 0, and then hit enter. That will load a kill rotation autopilot, and press E will execute, and then disables itself. So we've just killed our rotation. We're now inertially pointed, holding altitude here with respect to the stars. Okay, so now if I do cancel to unload C, and then do P200S1, spec 1, enter, and execute with E, that's the prograde autopilot. And that's what we just pressed on the button. So you have that. You also have Pro 200 Spec 2, which is retrograde. Pro 200 Spec 3, which is orbit normal. That's plus 90 degrees towards the North Pole. There's Pro 200 Spec 4, which is anti-normal towards the South Pole. And the last one is Pro 200 Spec 5, which is horizon level. And that one is particularly handy for VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing. You might say, oh, I see that how this is shaping up. This is how we do re-entry. No, no, re-entry in this craft is realistic, which means the actual re-entry attitude isn't here. It's about here. That's what the re-entry attitude looks like. Okay, so that is it. We're now going to reset the simulation and go for the Ascent autopilot, and I'll explain how that works. Okay, we're back on the ground, pretty much ready to go. Let's go to checklist 3. Check the EPU and battery. Passenger seatbelt is confirmed that it's on. Windows ray filter is set to medium. Ship control to atmospheric auto. Check all doors closed. D61.
Configuration correct.
We're good to go. And the rest of this stuff we're actually not going to do. The apply full power, full climb out. You could do that, but the autopilot is legit. It's better than a airliner. By the way, these doors here, I didn't close them earlier, but I would prefer that they are closed, because if I suddenly press the minus key, that opens the retro doors. And if you're going 6 kilometers per second in the atmosphere, that's a big problem. You will shear the doors off. In fact, if these temperatures here, they were reading at some point during ascent over 350 C. If those read above 350, you are toast, literally. Okay, actually you're burnt toast. Okay, Ascent Autopilot is for the ISS Pro 903. Funny that it says Spec 42. Program 903 is the autopilot. Sorry, mistyped that, 903. That is the autopilot. The specification is your inclination. So even though it says 42 is the ISS, you know, if I did 40, that's totally legit with a launch heading of 40 degrees. But we're going to use Pro 903 Spec 42 because that's where the ISS is. And you can see it's targeting about 230 kilometers, which is based on the weight. So the heavier you are, the lower you'll be. It wants to use a finite amount of fuel, which is very good for mission planning. That's why you want to use your autopilot for the longest missions, because you can budget your fuel. Okay, we ready to go? Execute. Press E.
Ascent autopilot engaged.
And we sit back. I'm not doing a thing.
80.
That's the auto air intake, by the way.
Rotate.
Isn't that just beautiful? Okay, so the one thing that the autopilot does not do is lock the gear. It does put the gear up. And the interesting thing is, it says turn the turbo pump on when the autopilot says to engage it, but the autopilot can actually and will actually enable the turbo pump when it feels like it. By the way, notice this isn't very efficient the way it's doing it right now. We're at 100% and we're actually...
Engaging turbo pump.
There it goes. We're actually at maximum airspeed, so that's actually really inefficient. We're simply burning off extra fuel. If I go to D3, we can keep an eye on the temperatures while it's working. If you notice, we also have some extra fields down here. We have the autopilot horizontal correction. It enters a corrective phase when it gets out of the atmosphere to correct your inclination. And in fact, we can check out how it's doing if I bring up the align planes and then target the ISS. So we do actually want to dock. So what it's doing is it's eliminating this relative inclination. By the way, this autopilot can also be enabled with Alt 6. If I go to D and it's program 7 and go to, I said it was Alt 6. There it is, 903 Spec 40. Now you do have to change that a little bit because the ISS may be at a different inclination. It almost always is. Okay, we're now in RCS mode. Okay, so the auto air intakes down here just closed. forward a lot because all you're doing is watching the autopilot at this point. I will mention, though, that if you use the number pad keys 4 and 6, you can actually change your launch heading if for some reason you decide to change your mind. That can help save a little bit of fuel. Or it can actually screw you up if you don't know what you're doing. So, basically, if you're going faster than 500 meters per second, it'll wait until you get to a corrective phase very late in Ascent to do it. So in the middle, it actually won't perform the adjustment. So that's it for now. Okay, so just a moment ago, the autopilot started its predictive correction. So this is one of the final phases of flight. Basically what it's doing is it's seeking 230 kilometers and 42 degrees of, well, it's not 42 degrees anymore, but it's seeking the inclination that we chose for it at Ascent. Which is actually superior to modern launch vehicles. Launch vehicles are unbelievably stupid. They just burn in a direction until they run out of fuel, and wherever you are, you are. So they have to do some corrections on board the spacecraft that is attached to the rocket, because the rocket doesn't do it for you. So this is actually a very precise launch vehicle. That's exactly what the OMS burns were for the space shuttle. You know, the stupid phase of flight was accelerating up to orbit.
Ascent completed. All parameters nominal.
So we're at 235 and 235. I am happy. So that's it. We're now in orbit. So we have had autopilot disengage. We're going to turn the backup systems off. And we're at 230 kilometers, so I'm not even going to bother to check the dynamic pressure. And seatbelt off. Yeah, so when the space shuttle main engines burn, that's basically akin to the stupid phase of flight. And then when you do your OMS burns, that is basically the equivalent of doing what our autopilot did. Okay, so I'm going to chase down the ISS. There's basically nothing involved in doing that. That is different from anything else that we've done so far. Let's do an on-orbit check real quick, which is D62.
Configuration correct.
And we're now in an orbit safe state. Wow, steep ascent. That's, let me see, I think that's Nova Scotia, and that's Newfoundland. Yeah. Cool. One of my favorite places in the Earth up that way. Okay. So, I'll come back when we're approaching the ISS. We'll go through the null speed autopilot. Okay, we're almost as close to the ISS as we're going to get. So, now's a good time to kill our relative velocity and reorient towards the ISS. So we do that with Pro 500 Spec 0. There's no other spec options available. Program 500 Specification 0 is the null relative speed autopilot. And it found the ISS. Basically, you know, as it says there, it'll search out objects. We're only within 100, or we're within 100 kilometers of only one object, which is the ISS. So we don't need to do 1, 2, or 3. We would like to select the ISS. So we do execute. So it's going to orient us to the retrograde velocity vector, and then it will fire main engines until we get to within 40 meters per second, which I think we are now. And then it'll fire RCS translation. So yeah, it's only doing RCS translation at this point. So if you need to stop quickly, don't use this, because you won't be able to stop quickly, because it's going to use RCS translation for the last couple meters per second. So we're trying to get close enough where we can activate the docking autopilot, and it can do almost everything. Oh, it looks like we're over the, I think it's the Gulf of Oman. It's whatever the Red Sea empties out to. So, wow, it's really messing with that vector. Okay, kind of strange. Wow, it's going for 3 decimal places. That's amazing. The docking autopilot is extremely robust. I know I've worked it at 2.5 kilometers. I don't know if I've ever done it at 10 kilometers. But we'll see if it can do it at 10 kilometers. So what we're going to do is we're going to burn towards the ISS, and then we're going to run through the before docking checklist. I am not very pleased. I'm going to guess it's because we're relatively far out, or it's not an autopilot that quits. That's a... Okay, I think I just realized that. I think what it's doing is it's actually forcing a null speed. So it's actually correcting for our orbit. That's pretty cool. Because watch, if I disengage it, well, actually that display is going to go away. But you see the velocity here is ticking up. All right, let's go seek it out. By the way, I think I've mentioned this before, but when I work RCS, I use the keyboard because joystick and yokes just don't make sense to me. Oh, well, that's handy. We're actually going in that direction. Let's see, we're going to do this. So, if you can do vector addition in your head, it's really good. Because I'm burning here, and we already have 1 meter per second component in the direction of the ISS, we will have to do as many burns. But then there's an acceleration component, so we wouldn't be burning here. We'd really be burning a little bit further down. But you know that velocity vector is going to move over time. I want to go faster than that. Okay. Before docking checklist. Check the nose cone is open. You never told me to open the nose cone, so we're going to do that. That's unrealistic. Sound in space. No status message? Really? Huh. Absolutely no status message. That's weird. Okay. I don't like that. Check that the airlock pressure is 100% so that we don't kill the astronauts or us. Check both airlock doors are closed. That's a sanity check. You notice this green light now has disappeared. We can't work the outer door because there's vacuum outside of it. In order to work the outer door, we'd have to empty the chamber. Okay, passenger seatbelt, turn that on. We want to be wearing our spacesuits in case I'm an idiot and crash. Turn the backup life support system on. This is what I was talking about earlier. EPU? Why is it with the EPU on? Yeah, there's no external power. That doesn't make any sense. That's senseless. Oh, that... Okay. Doc. I kind of missed that. Yeah, that's my bad. I can't believe I made that mistake. That's like a rookie error. Okay, we're going to run the docking autopilot now. So you can use Alt 4, not Alt F4, Alt 4, or Pro 300 Spec 0. And there's no other specifications. You must use Nav 1 for your docking, which I've done. You go to COM Nav, docking port 1. You have to use Nav 1. Kind of pisses me off because I like to use Nav 1 for the ISS's transponder and Nav 2 for the docking port. But anyway, that's probably, I can fix that in the autopilot if I feel like it. Write a new one. Okay, we're going to execute. And it's going to do everything. Every single thing. And let me tell you, this autopilot is legit. You're like, oh, auto docking? How long would that take? Yeah, no, seriously, this thing is fast. Like, I have to try to be fast to actually beat how fast it goes. And it's a minimization autopilot. It will move in the fewest possible motions that it can. And it will approach from the closest possible orientation. It's an interesting number. I'm all for eliminating distractions. Okay, so orbiter crashed, but as you saw, I just did a quick save earlier, so all I had to do was execute the autopilot. So from your perspective, the only thing you notice is a sudden jolt backwards. And the autopilot does things the same way every single time. Which is another really great way to use autopilots, because if you restore, you know, it's like, oh, I just flew into space. How am I going to restore that? Whereas if you said, I just executed this autopilot at this time, you do the exact same process and the exact same things will happen. Otherwise, you will encounter a different course of events using the same actions, which is the definition of insanity. Okay, we should be moving into step 4, which is the approach, pretty soon. It's taken a bit longer than I remember. Looks like we're over, wow, I think those are the Himalayas. I think we're over China and Nepal. Yeah, sweet. Docking over Mount Everest. Oh man, this is gonna look cool. We're gonna be right over the Himalayas when docking occurs. Let's see if I can find Everest. Be one of these rivers that lead in. I don't know. So now it's moving on to final approach. And this is the fast and amazing part where, you know, you don't see it correct at all. It just goes in and it slows down and slows down a little bit more and it slows down a little bit more. And it's so precise. What happens in orbiter is when you get within 0.1 meters or 10 centimeters of the docking adapter, it will essentially teleport you to the exact position of the docking adapter. But if you're really accurate with it, you're already there. So this autopilot is so accurate that when you dock, you don't have that teleportation because it's that spot on. By the way, just to note, I'm going with the default fuel setting. I didn't change that at all. So we have the default 2 week and moon range. You would want to do that before you take off, but I was ready for takeoff anyway, and the scenario set it, which is what I prefer. I use the default scenario, departure to ISS or KSC to ISS, something like that. All right, this is it.
Houston, we show capture and hard dock. Congratulations.
Again, perfect. Just what I expected. And I believe we're over the, is it the Gobi Desert? Or no, it's the Tibetan Plateau. Gobi Desert's like out that way, if I remember correctly. Okay, so the first step, oh shoot, that failed. Forgot about that. So external power's connected. We're no longer dependent on our systems for support. I'm going to close the retro door because I do not want that firing. We're connected. Let's see. Open the inner and outer doors. That's from the perspective of the ISS, by the way, and the inner door. Okay, so that's it. We are now, if I go here, yes, you can see the CO2 level and moisture changing as the atmosphere of the ISS interchanges with ours. So there's a little bit of a mixing process going on, kind of like a nanoscale weather system, if you will. Okay, and that's it. You can refuel, you can power off, you can do whatever you want. Sometime, you know, if you're going to be here for an extended period of time, might be a good idea to disable the valves. That way you can't accidentally induce something. So we've just hit the end of the checklist, which means it's time for my outro. So thank you guys for joining me. I hope running through these checklists was helpful for you because, I mean, it is a tutorial and it does say what to do specifically, but I feel like explaining the processes of what's going on in the background and kind of stitching it all together is kind of helpful for some people. But anyway, I've been Dr. Aeronautics, and I will see you guys next time, where I will continue to be Dr. Aeronautics. Bye-bye.